In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a brilliant chat with Kim Houghton, the Chief Economist at the Regional Australia Institute. Now, this is another audio clip from the YouTube series I've been doing, catching up with previous podcast guests. And although Kim is not a previous podcast guest, he's a good friend of the Smart Community Podcast. When we recorded this in mid-April 2020, Kim was in quarantine in a hotel in Hobart. I'm pleased to share that he is out of quarantine and everything is going okay. In this interview, Kim and I discuss what COVID has exposed for us, particularly in regional areas, such as connectivity issues, lack of digital literacy, and the emergence of the decade-old conversation about the digital divide in regions. We talk about online learning tools and the wider impacts of that for those who do not have reliable internet, plus the need for capacity and confidence building in digital skills for both young and old in regional and underserved areas. Given Kim was in quarantine at the time of recording, we also talk about the challenges of isolation, working from home, and the power of digital connections, plus how we can make digital a tool that works for us, rather than be slaves to it. We finished our chat discussing the opportunities and challenges showing up in this crisis around the area of regional resilience, plus why we all need to be mindful of digital etiquette. As this was not a normal podcast interview, Kim didn't share with us how you can connect with him, but you can find him on LinkedIn, and the link for this will be in the description of the episode and in the show notes as well. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the Smart Community, Smart Regions, Smart Towns and Smart Cities. It's where we live, work and play with smart communities. The future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Kim. How are you today?
Hey, Zoe, I'm pretty good. I'm deep in isolation, quarantine, in fact, not just isolation, in mandatory quarantine. So it's an interesting experience.
Tell us where you are and what you've been up to.
So Regional Australia Institute, which I'm the Chief Economist of, we've been pretty busy, but all of our face-to-face regional stuff has stopped, about, as with most people, about a couple of months ago. So that's a big change for us. So we're doing lots of online and phone work. So I was sort of happily doing that from our sort of main base in Canberra, but my mum's taken very ill and she lives in Hobart with the rest of my family. So I've made the journey to Hobart because I want to see her at some stage. The issue is, of course, that when you arrive in Tasmania, you are quarantined at the Premier's pleasure for a period of 14 days in a room, a single room, not able to leave the room in a hotel. And I'm in about day 3 or 4. I'm already starting to lose count, but in about day 3 or 4 of that. So I'm still working, but without actually being able to leave this room, which is a bit challenging.
And we were going to have a video chat, but the Wi-Fi wasn't being our friend. So we've decided to just go audio, which is totally fine. And I guess leading on from that we were just having a conversation around, what COVID has actually exposed for us, particularly in regional areas. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, I do. I mean, we've put a few things up on the Institute's website now, and if people are looking for we've done some initial analysis of how things like the JobKeeper and JobSeeker will play out across regions. It will play out very differently across different sorts of regions, and a couple of other researchers are starting to put out now some modelling about how the restrictions are going to impact on regions. I think broadly the consensus is that the more of the highly affected industry types you have in your region, the more your region will be affected. That seems to make logical sense, which tends to look fairly favourably on regions that are strong in mining, agriculture, food processing, and even some manufacturing is holding up fairly well. So I think we're seeing a big hit to the cities because that's where a lot of the service industries are, and that's put a major break on those. But of course, the regions that rely on tourism, whether it's domestic or international, are also being very hard hit at the moment. So that's the first round of stuff that we've been doing. We've been doing. But yeah, you're right. What this is flagging for us is in a way, it's sounding like a revival of what we were talking about, probably close to 10 years ago now, in terms of the digital divide, because with more and more services and support relying on broadband to access, whether it's online learning, I'd like to tell you a bit of a story about that, or there's online health stuff. Mm-hmm. It's really exploiting some weaknesses in a lot of regional communities in relation to use and access of those digital services.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, and we're talking about, there's lots of components to it. You've got your, basic kind of internet access. So getting internet access and that being reliable, but then you've also got the access part, and digital literacy is really important, because you might have internet to your house, but if you've never had that connected, or you don't have a device to access that on, and that type of thing. And I think the digital literacy aspect is one that we can address. Much more difficult now, because the way that we're connecting with people is digital. And if you can't access the digital, that makes it very difficult. I do think there's lots we can do, but we really need to focus in on that as well from, I guess, a whole nation level. But then, particularly focusing in on the regional and rural areas. Because I was thinking about it, if you don't have internet right now, you aren't getting any information at all, potentially, which is really quite scary if when you think about it like that. If you're not you don't know what's happening in the rest of the world, or the rest of Australia, or even just your own town, if you don't have internet access. And then that isolation factor of that as well. The only way we can actually connect with people now is through, obviously phone as well, but that internet access. So, any thoughts on the digital divide?
Oh, look, I think you're spot on. I think what's funny is we're using language which is a decade old. Nobody's really talked about this stuff for the last sort of 10 years or so. I think partly because we've all been seduced by, as you say, the maps of coverage are looking really good now. I was on the NBN website the other day, and I think they're saying about 98% of households have access, either through sort of fixed line or Sky Muster, and Sky Muster's improved. NBN's done a fantastic job in getting this stuff out. But I think what this has exposed just in the last couple of weeks is that those maps only tell part of the story. It's access to the network that's been the driver of the whole NBN process, but its take-up and use is really different. There's a chart on the front page of the NBN site which shows the first chart shows availability, and the second one shows take-up, and there's about a 40% gap, between number of households that are taking up NBN and number of households that have access to it. So, and I reckon that's heavily weighted towards places that are more affluent and more urban. So the 40% is very likely to be lower income people and regional people. And this is where we were sort of 10 years ago when we first started talking about the information superhighway and its consequences. And I think the driver for this coming out now has been really, really basic stuff. Two things. GP consult. So for a lot of us now, GP consult is being done on the phone or ideally over the web. Now, you very quickly work out whether your patient can or can't do that, and particularly can't do it over the web. Big red flag there. And the second driver is the homeschooling thing, where a lot of schools have gone to move very fast to implement sort of online learning platforms, but they are also realising that in regional places, the vast majority of the families, the households the kids are coming from, don't. Can I tell you a story about that, Zoe?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Our communications manager, who's had a lifetime working in the media, she lives and works, and she had to keep this secret for a long time. This is another aspect, actually, but she kept secret from the world for a long time that she lived and worked from a farm in Warrialda, which is up near Moree in northwestern New South Wales, and she had to keep it a secret because professionally she didn't want to be found out for living and working in a country town. She made her career in the cities and felt, I think quite rightly for a long time, that living and working in the country would be a black mark against her and she'd lose some of that sense of professionalism. So she's kept it hidden. She's now sort of a bit more sort of out and about with it, which is great. In her school, when the school was closed, the principal asked the parents who has access to the internet, and about 60% of the households came back and said, yes, we do. But of those, only about half of that 60% said that their access was reliable. So you've gone for a public school in a reasonably small town in northwest New South Wales. You've gone from having 100% of students down to about 30% whose families say they have reliable access to the internet. Now, the coverage map for Warrialda is fantastic. If you haven't got sort of broadband through the the fibre network, then you've got access to SkyMaster. So those maps look great. What this has exposed is that the vast majority of families up there don't have access. They don't have the packages. They may or may not have the technology at home. We don't know about the distribution between small devices and large devices. It's hard to do online learning on a phone than it is on a computer, for instance. And the principal then took the decision that, well, he said, our school can't run online learning on this basis, so we're going to go paper-based. So here we are in the first part of 2020. We're a reasonably affluent, by a lot of standards, community in inland New South Wales. The parents are going into school once a week to pick up a pack of papers that have been photocopied, put in a manila envelope to give their kids some study to do. Now that's, there's big issues around that for the immediate sort of equity of this sort of process. But I think what really got our communications manager concerned was this has put into sharp relief something that's been worrying her for a while, which is that the city kids are generally having much more exposure to using online learning platforms and online learning tools, and her school hadn't, and they hadn't at all before this because it really wasn't available to the kids, and the staff and the principal knew that. So what she's worried about is not just this short-term issue about how do we manage next term if we can't do online learning, but the wider implications of this are that there's a generation of school kids in regional parts of the country, in this case in regional New South Wales, who don't have that online learning familiarity, that online learning literacy that's going to be completely necessary for the workplace of the future. So there's two aspects here. There's the immediate one, which I think this issue is flagged, but there's this longer one where we're suddenly realising, hell's bells, there's a bunch of people out there who were getting left behind and we didn't even know it.
Mm. Yeah, I think this has really exposed that digital divide. Or I was talking to somebody and it actually has, it was growing, but now it's kind of exploded. And whether that's because we're getting all that information or whether we are now realising it or whether now it's even worse than it was before. But I think the exposing of it, we need to take this seriously, right? And I'm wondering how we're going to really hone in on this and focus in on this, because that connectivity has to be a human right, because the way that we live now is if you don't have that, you're opting out of so much of the modern world. And I think when we do talk about this, I think people think you have to have one or the other. So you have to be totally online and digital and, doing all your social media and, you're living online and not talking to people face to face, or the other way where you're anti-technology, whatever. But that's so not true. There is a medium, a happy balance in the middle, and that will be different for everyone as well. But we need to actually bring that aspect to the forefront. Like, I think that's one of the biggest things, and particularly in regional areas.
Yeah, you've been a fantastic advocate, Zoe, of the uses to which some of these digital technologies can be put, to improve community cohesion or the functioning of cities. That sort of stuff's absolutely vital. We need people like you to keep saying that message. I think that the thing for me in this particular predicament is that, we're seeing very clearly that it's no longer just about the hardware. It's not about the access. I think we have largely solved the availability challenge, but we haven't addressed the cost challenge, particularly to people in low income, and a lot of rural areas are low income as well as outer urban city places. But I think more importantly for me, it's going back to that notion about, well, how can you be what you can't see? How can you use the internet sort of wisely and as a good learning tool if no one around you is doing it? Mm. So we're back to, and what I like about that though, is that the community responses to this have proven very effective in the past, and we can do that stuff again. So when the first wave of broadband started rolling out, I remember there were lots of community hubs where we'd get young kids talking to older people. There was a lot of effort being put in at the community level to build digital literacy. Now, there is absolutely no reason, well, apart from the current 1.5 metre rule, there's no reason we can't do more of that now. It's not about the hardware and the cabling. It's about getting the awareness and the confidence up in regional communities so that they can see the value of this stuff and find that middle line that you're talking about. Because you're quite right, a lot of regional families are probably hearing on the news about how there are kids' screen time problems in the cities and thinking, well, we don't want our families to go down that path. But that's one end of the spectrum. You don't want to sort of cut the kids out from all of that on the basis of those sort of rumours coming from other places. You need to build that capacity and internal capacity and confidence so that the kids and older people have the ability to use those internet resources really well.
And I think responsible use, that sounds really boring, but it's that confidence is so important, because then you know that you don't have to be all in, like you don't have to opt in for absolutely everything. Because I think when we first get in, we think we have to be everywhere to everyone all of the time. And if this is your first exposure to the internet, it can be quite overwhelming, but it can then become really scattered, right? So you're like, oh, I'm here. Oh, no, there's too many channels. There's all these things. But once you build that confidence, you realize you can say with confidence, okay, I play on this platform, or I'm hanging out in this area or whatever, or I use this channel of communication. Can you message me here or whatever? Whereas if you're not confident, and the other thing is I think people get quite worried about technology taking over our lives and that type of thing, but the change is happening whether we like it or not, and change is happening whether we are involved or not. So let's actually get involved and shape it, because technology is just a tool that we need to use. And I think the more confident you are, the more you can question it as well. And that's really important, because we don't want to just take everything for face value that, there are people out there that are doing bad things, but there are also companies out there that are using our data for, certain things that maybe we don't want our data to be used for. But instead of sitting on the sideline, you actually have to get in and ask the questions, because the more people are asking those questions, that's how movements start. That's how things change. They don't change by pointing from the sideline.
Oh, I think that's right. And I think most of us can remember when we first started playing around on the web, it was amazing, and have those experiences where you after you get really sort of mesmerised by it, and half an hour later you've got no idea how you got to the particular pages you're on, but gee, it's interesting. And I think what we want to see, as you're describing, is we want to see a generation of users who are informed and discriminating, who can weigh up the quality and the range of information that they're seeing, and have some judgment through experience, which allows them to see what's real and what's not, and what's true and what's not, because that'll help to build their skills and their confidence and their capabilities.
And okay, let's go back to you. So how are you feeling during this whole period of, the crisis that we're going through? How are you feeling personally?
It was all right. When I was at home, home was all right, because I've only been working for the Institute about 4 years. Before that, I had about almost 20 years as a consultant, and I worked predominantly from home then. So I've seen I got sort of relatively young kids, but I saw them grow up while I was working from home. So I got over any of those sort of concerns, and I was quite happy in that early phase when I was working from home with the family rather than going into the office. But I do have to say that this absolute isolation that I'm in now is really quite emotionally and mentally challenging. I've got a room that's 7.5 paces from one end to the other. There's a guard outside the door to make sure I don't leave, and I'm in here for 14 days to prove that I'm not carrying anything. Now I know that I'm not carrying anything, and that's sort of beside the point. I have to stay here for 14 days so that I can get out and hopefully see my parents. So these sort of connections are absolutely vital. If I didn't have my work to do, and if I didn't have the contact with the outside world that my work was bringing to me in this room, I'd be going bananas, I reckon, Zoe.
And I think that connection is so important, and obviously it's not exactly the same. And I think we also need to, I guess, work through the feelings that we're going through as well, because as much as, we can be grateful, and I'm super grateful that I still have work to do and that I have internet and that I can still connect with people, we're all suffering with this, overwhelming heaviness that the whole country or the whole world is going through at the moment. And so we're going to go through, kind of phases of, oh, yeah, this is fine, I'm good. And then, oh, actually, no, I'm not good anymore. Okay, what am I going to do to change that? Who I need to connect with? How can I bring those spirits up again? And then, that there might be days where, it's not okay, and you can't work out why. And then, moving through those feelings and emotions and all those things. And then at the same time, trying to get work done as well and study and all those things. So I think this time is such a strange time to, I guess, be living. But then also, I've been really taking stock of the things I am grateful for, which has helped me kind of move through a lot of those emotions and then coming out the other side. And one of those things is connecting with awesome people. And someone said to me on LinkedIn, because I did ask this question on LinkedIn about what people are digitally grateful for. And someone pointed out that those connections that we're making now, because it's normal to have a video conference or even a phone call with anyone in the world, where it wasn't quite normal before.
Yes.
It was face-to-face or digital if you had to, but it wasn't seen as important, or, it was lower level, or it was something like we had this block in our head that that wasn't a normal thing to do. Let's just not have that connection until we see them face to face, or something like that. I'm trying to work out the right words for that. But now I reach out to, my previous podcast guests from around the world, and we have these conversations, and there's no agenda, right? It's just and not necessarily all the recorded ones either, like the one we're doing today, but other ones that I've just gone, okay, let's just have a chat. And someone pointed out, it's connecting with those people that when I guess the ones that feel you can, what's the word, relate with, and then, you want to get their thoughts to bring you hope, I guess, and bring you up. And so then you can have those rich, deep, meaningful conversations and realize that as much as the rest of the world have changed, there are definitely parts that haven't, and we can leverage this time to actually make really good things happen. And, you want to talk to people that are thinking about the opportunities and all those type of things, as well as connect and work through, the difficult emotions as well. So I found it really interesting that someone else had to point that out to me, that that's what I was doing. But it really made me grateful that I have these people that we can reach out to. And again, that's what makes me really concerned about this time for people that are in isolation and aren't using those connections or don't have those connections. How do you actually make those now, particularly if you don't have digital literacy? Yeah. So, it's something I've been thinking and how to address that as well. And, what I can do with my influence and my, ability to do things and my connections, how can we address some of those things?
Yeah, and I think sharing those experiences, as you said right at the beginning, it's hard to sort of share those experiences at the moment with people that aren't connected because they're sort of excluded from those exchanges. But I think we need to try to keep that message flowing that, that those of us that are connected need to be passing on in any way that we can to those that aren't, not to worry about it. Here are some entry pathways, here are some entry steps. And hoping that once the physical distancing restrictions are removed, we will see a bit of a return of, internet in the pub type stuff or wherever it is that people gather, so that we can set it up for perhaps close some of those digital divides in the short term. I like what you said about this particular crisis, meaning that these sort of digital connections are not second rate anymore. I think that's a really important sort of thought to hold on to. It's not as though we're devaluing those or devaluing other people. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It seems to have opened up a willingness to talk. I think a lot of us are perhaps sort of re-establishing contact with people that we hadn't had contact with for quite a while because we've got a bit of time to do so, and we'll just sort of check in and see how they're going. And that's not seen as intrusive anymore. It's actually sort of seen as welcome. So I think we could see this as sort of strengthening the wider networks. We all get a bit locked into keeping in closer contact with the people that are closest to us, but it's possible that this particular few months will enable us to rebuild and strengthen some of those relationships that go a bit further out, which would be fun.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. And so this year, like you're at school kind of, that are my age, we're all turning 30, right? And it's going to be quite a different time. I've cancelled my birthday party, all those things. It was going to be huge. And one of the girls I went to school with, and we keep in some contact. There's some friends of friends there and all those type of things. But she put on Instagram, that she put up a photo of her 20th and, that she was really having a different time this year. And she's actually stuck in a small town in France. And she's been living there for quite a while now. And I said, have you made it back? And she went, I couldn't, she couldn't get back in time before the closures happened and all those type of things. And so she's spending her 30th in isolation. She's been in isolation for 28 days now or something like that. And on Instagram, she just said, if we are friends in real life, please reach out. And I went, yes. And so then I sent her a message and just said, how are you going? And, all those things. But it was just nice to have a conversation. And I think what you said about it not being intrusive anymore is really on point. I hadn't quite worked out what language to use in that, because it is a bit like that. When we got a message or whatever, it was from someone not in our real life. That's so interesting. And I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've been writing a lot of stuff about the smart life in real life now, because it has to be. And for me, it was before, you've heard me speak about these things, but now it's made it quite normal. And we're going to have to embrace the things that we, the digital, but then I was talking again to someone this morning about we need to make digital and technology a tool for us, and we can't be a slave to it. And the only way you do that is by continuing to build that digital literacy and realizing what things work and don't work for you, and testing and playing. And then, like you said, being quite, making judgment calls about those things as well. And I think this time will help us choose and change things that maybe we were just kind of playing with at the start of this time, I suppose, or before this time. So, yeah, it will be really interesting.
Yep, no, I think that's right. It's going to be, I don't know how many of these things will stick afterwards. People are sort of thinking about massive drivers of massive social change. I don't know. I mean, one of the things that we think about regionally, because if we do get more confidence in these digital relationships, then of course it makes it easier for people to, particularly who are selling services rather than their sort of physical presence, to actually operate from wherever, regional centres or smaller towns, and continue to earn and grow their sort of professional skills. But whether or not, and some people are saying, well, this will open the door for all that. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm a bit sceptical about that, because the ability to do that technically has been around for a very long time, 20 or 30 years at least. But nobody's really embraced that, either the employers or the workers. So I think there's something a little bit deeper in our resistance to that than just the ability. Although I think what this current sort of few weeks and months is doing is it's giving us all a lot more sort of confidence and fluency in using these systems, and becomes a lot more commonplace to do so. But I just don't know about whether we'll see a sort of significant shift in home-based working or regionally based working from here on, or whether we'll sort of drift back gradually to where we've come from, because there are some other anchors in that around physical proximity, around relationships, around neighbours, which are perhaps stronger than some of these other drivers.
Yeah, I'm really keen to see what happens, and I guess and try and be a driving force behind promoting and supporting regional work in particular. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting, particularly when the restrictions first drop. It'll be like we'll be at the candy shop or whatever, lolly shop. Oh my God, people, hello, people. But then what will happen later on? Because I think for employees, particularly employees that wanted to work flexibly and then told that they couldn't because of whatever reason, now it's like, well, hang on, we did it, or can we keep doing it? And I think again, there has to be a combination, right? It's not just, you don't have to be all remote or all in person. I think that the idea of flexibility and adaptability is that you can shift and change based on both your personal circumstances, as an employee, but then as a staff member, contract, whatever. But then also on the other side, you need to be serving the employer in the best way that you can. And then what's the culture like that you can actually do that? So there's lots of things in that, the technology's there, but I think you touched on a point, which is it's the culture, and will this force a cultural change? And I think particularly in younger generations, there will be, but also, I don't know, what this has exposed is the fragile nature of some of the, things that we are involved in, and the way that we are involved in employment as well. So that's been fascinating and quite, what's the word, just devastating to watch in some cases. And then what are the lessons learned out of this as well, and what safety nets do we have to have in place, and, all those type of things, and the way we're employed. And, there's a complex web of all those things, and it doesn't just affect the cities, it also affects our regional areas as well.
I think we've been talking a lot for quite some years now about regional resilience, and everybody nods wisely and says, yes, we want to build regional resilience. But I think this has really shown, there's a lot of elephants in the room here, one of which is that regions rely heavily on mobile labour. That's classic economics. Labour will move to where the jobs are. But in a situation like this where labour can't move, that's a real impediment to resilience. And actually what we should have is much more robust internal sort of regional labour markets where people are being skilled up. There's better connections with the learning organisations and the people, old or young, and the employers, so that actually people are growing up and able to pick up the skills they need in their regional context to work in those jobs that they would like in their regional context or somewhere else. That sort of self-sufficiency is a big part of resilience, and we've been blinded to that again, I think, by this sort of acceptance that people flowing in and out is natural and will always be available to us. And the moment that it's not. Can I ask you, and we're probably running out of time, but I just want to propose one thing which always troubled me a little bit around the sort of the decentralised working and home-based working one. I agree completely that it's not really a technology problem, but what really I find strange is that I haven't seen a package of remote working technology which mimics the office. You see a lot of stuff which allows people to dial into things, but I haven't seen a package which mimics the office in the sense of like you're always on. And I wrote about this a while ago. There was a package which sort of mimics the office by having all your peers on the screen. You'd be able to sort of switch on and switch off the camera and the monitoring so you didn't feel like you were monitored. But the ability to have those sort of casual conversations with one of your workmates remotely through some sort of digital knocking, have you got a moment? That we don't have that scale of thinking about replicating a number of aspects of the office through a tech platform. And I'm just really surprised by that, because I think, broadly it's not around lack of technology, the technology's there, but this kind of much more softer, interactive, always on kind of connectability stuff, that really hasn't been developed. I haven't come across it, and I think it would be a bit of a game changer if it started to take hold. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. For me, it's not exactly mimicking an office, but I use, and you probably used as well, Slack, which basically is a bit more, it feels a bit more informal, although I run my whole business on Slack as communication. And it's not that people are always on necessarily, because particularly the way that we work these days, if it's, maybe you do a few hours a week for this company or that company or whatever, it's a bit more challenging. But the other one that I use in my contract basis, like in my engineering world, is Teams, and that seems to be big now. And it hasn't mimicked it, exactly. But I would argue, do we want to mimic that office? Because I get what you mean. And I think there's a different digital etiquette, right? And I think what that casual conversation is, I think that will build over time, because I'm quite, used to doing that. Like I'll just basically virtually tap someone on the shoulder by Teams, or we do use Skype as well, but then on Slack, and I'll just, tag somebody and say, hey, when you've got a minute, let's chat. And then when they're free, they'll do that or whatever. But I don't think it's a technology thing, because you could have a Zoom call going forever, like going all day if you wanted to. And Teams is a little bit like that, where, you have certain channels and meetings and that type of thing. But it is a different world. And I think we need to really appreciate that not everyone is used to it yet. And it's taken a long time. When like graduates first came into the office, there was a bit of, orientation that needed to happen, and not formally, but like informally, this is how an office works and this is how this does, whatever. Whereas now it's probably, I don't want to say it's just the older generation that aren't used to it, because that's not the case. It's a lot of people in different generations. So it's this intergenerational commonality that we have if you're not used to, working in front of your office is now your computer screen.
Yes. I think as a nerdy researcher, I think what you made me think of, that perhaps all I need is an interruptibility meter running on the side of my image on the screen, so that others can see whether I'm sort of ready for an interruption, or whether I'd rather keep sort of working on something for the next 15 minutes. Just little things like that.
Yeah, well, because we have, in Teams and in Slack, not as much. You can change your availability on Slack, and you can actually make it to say different things, like as in you can type in ready for an interruption, I suppose. But you kind of have to be interacting in there all the time. Yeah. But on Teams, like you're kind of you're green, red, or away, or whatever, or do not disturb. So I think the etiquette piece will be that you keep those things up to date and that people know what they mean. Yes. I think there's a little bit of training, that's required on that. Like it kind of just came at us, and, okay, everyone's on, way back in the day when we were all on Skype, but people didn't really respect that. Whereas now I'm finding that I do that a little bit more. I go, oh, okay, they're in a meeting. Okay, I won't call them now. I'll just send them a little message to say, hey, can are you free? And we had a bit of a chat actually in one of my other teams about what the etiquette is. Like, do I do this? Do you send a message, or do you wait, or do you send an email or whatever? So yeah, it's been really quite interesting to play in that space.
Yep, I reckon that's the next level of remote working, isn't it?
Yep. Well, it's been so great to chat with you, Kim. I really have enjoyed this chat, and thanks so much for agreeing to come on. And I feel like we will have another chat soon. Let's have another chat. And I've been saying this to some of my other guests as well, like have a chat in maybe a couple of weeks or a month and just see where we're at. And I'm fascinated with the research that you're doing, and I'm really looking forward to seeing, the results of that as well. And, it's obviously continuing, ongoing, and how we deal with this. And and then just kind of seeing if we can do some collaboration in the future as well.
Yeah, thanks. I really enjoyed this. It's been good for my mental health too, I think, to have my horizons expanded. So thank you very much for reaching into my hotel room like this.
No worries. I've also really enjoyed it. And, we met in person at Mid-North Coast Ignite, and, we've been meaning to catch up, right, ever since. And I guess this has kind of not forced us, but it just, I saw a post of yours on LinkedIn and I went, oh, yes, okay. And so I'm glad that, we were able to connect like this. So thank you for, coming on.
No, great pleasure. Thank you.
We'll talk soon.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
See you. Bye.
The Smart Community podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're looking for support in podcast strategy and production, workshop design and facilitation, or communication and media advisory, get in touch. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.